This panel is about financing your campaign, and it's really important. It's one of the most important aspects of the campaign. In 2008, the average congressional race was about $1 million just to finance the campaign. So it's incredibly expensive to finance campaigns. That's why we're spending quite a bit of time on it. It'll be about 90 minutes of this panel. So let's get going. We have Eric Egmont, who was a candidate for the California 4th Congressional District. His fundraising success totaled nearly $200,000 for his campaign before the primary, the result of which caused the incumbent to withdraw from the race. Also, again, we have Casey O'Shea, former campaign manager for Congressman Charlie Melasaw, who, due to Casey's efforts, the Melasaw campaign was able to successfully raise over $1.7 million in the 2004 cycle and over $2.5 million in the 2006 cycle. In addition, we have Pete Hegseth, the chairman and executive director of the Political Action Committee Vets for Freedom. Pete is a graduate of Princeton University, served in Cuba with the National Guard, and in Iraq with the 101st Airborne Division. His Political Action Committee, or PAC, as we'll discuss here, has raised and distributed over $150,000 to support veteran candidates across the country. Finally, we now have on the panel Tim Persico, the campaign manager for Congressman Patrick Murphy from Pennsylvania, a veteran from Pennsylvania who won his seat in 2006 and his re-election in 2008. Due to Persico's efforts, Congressman Murphy was able to successfully raise another $2.5 million in the 2006 cycle and just under $4 million for the 2008 cycle. So, we'd like to begin with one simple question. What's the secret? What's the secret to raising money? How were each of you able to raise money so well? If each of you could touch upon the most effective ways of raising money and explain the level of commitment from the candidate that's necessary in order to make something like this happen. We're just going to start with Mr. Eglin and go down the line here. So just keep your remarks to about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have roughly half an hour after this to take some of your questions and answers. So thank you very much, and welcome to the group.
Great, thanks. Great to be back. I'm going to talk about what I talked about earlier, the coin. I have written out an outline about what I call the coin campaign. Experience counterterrorism, counterinsurgency. I saw so many parallels with a political campaign. Now, I really was an insurgent because I was going against the incumbent in my own party. But I've drawn these parallels that apply more broadly to the various types of scenarios that you can be in as a candidate. The fundraising, one thing, I think the biggest thing is that sort of top-down versus bottom-up mentality. We've seen in the battlefield that a top-down approach might work great in conventional structure, but once it changes, you gotta have a bottom-up approach. The application for that in the fundraising sphere, I think, is understanding how valuable large numbers of small donors can be, and then the various ways that you can achieve that, whether it's just making phone calls, through emails to people that you know, and through online efforts. The gal that spoke last year, I was really impressed. If she's still here, that was a fantastic briefing on social network era, on just leveraging new media. And I raised a lot of money doing that, and I took tons of notes that I'm going to use for Troops Need You. But one of the things she mentioned, redstate.com. I had a blog that just decided they wanted to back what I was doing because they were disgusted by what my opponent had done as well. They raised me $10,000 in 48 hours. And that was just all, some blog. It's not the most popular blog in the world, but it was amazing what they were able to accomplish. And then once you have that, you have this whole base of donors, you have a list of people who supported you. And then you start leveraging that and say, hey, if can you tell friends, can you donate again? Here's the progress that we've made because of that. And so that success builds upon success. And so you start with what you can control. It's another principle in coin is, do what you can do. Don't try to change the whole country on your deployment. Start small and build on success. And that's the same thing you're going to do when you're fundraising. You're going to start with your immediate circle, your friends and your family, then your close friends, then your extended friends, then all your sort of alumni networks, people that you can pick up the phone, call, or email, your whole email contact list. You're talking a dozen people to 100 people to maybe 1,000 people, and those three spheres, and then ask them for money, and just practice that. What it reminded me of constantly is when I was 11, I took my first paper route, and it struck me because I remember right as I started, they said, hey, we have this promotion. In addition to delivering the paper every day to your set route, if you will go out and sell newspapers, if you will get new subscriptions, new people to subscribe, they're having a contest. And this was in California. You get a trip to Disneyland if you sold enough subscriptions. It was a lot of subscriptions. And basically, I just kind of thought, oh, I'll give it a shot. I knocked on a couple doors. Most people said no. A couple people said yes. And like by the third day, I kind of told my folks who were driving around the neighborhood. I think they just wanted me to stay out of trouble. But I kind of said, you know what? I remember saying this, like, Dad, out of those 20, every time I knock on 20 doors, I get a subscription. I don't know which number of the 20 it's going to be, but it happens. And so that's kind of the mentality. That's kind of that model. It becomes like a numbers game. And so anyone who's worked in finance or insurance or cold calling, you get that. But keep that mentality. It's more, you've got to keep that battle rhythm. You've got to keep trying every day and make it that key cornerstone of your schedule and make that fundraising happen. Start close and then branch out. And so I think that's really important. The other thing is sort of house to house. When you're out deployed, if you knock on the wrong door, you knock the wrong door down, there's a price. You got to know what's the right door to knock down. That's the power of information. And so when you're looking up donors and you're trying to figure out who you're going to target, people are going to offer you lists and people are going to offer help. Some are going to want money. Some are just want to genuinely be helpful. Don't just take any list that someone gives you. It needs to be someone that you specifically think you will connect with, someone who will resonate with your message, has already donated to similar candidates in similar situations as yours. Don't just think, oh, they're a donor to my party, so I'm going to go after them. Really focus it. And also remember that individuals can have a huge impact. I got introduced to a guy through two different people. One was, and this is kind of a lesson of just keep plugging away, and you never know where you're going to get a break. So I got a break because I was a big blogger and had been online for a while, and that some blogs backed me, and that helped a lot. Another thing was just getting connected with really big, influential donors. And that was, in one case, I got connected with a guy I patrolled in Baghdad with, and he worked with a guy who was, he thought would support me. The guy did, but he recommended me to this big Silicon Valley guy. And then I spoke at some sort of podunk lunch out in the middle of a park with 40 people and some Civil War reenactor. Everybody's kind of scratching their heads like, what's this guy doing? And as a candidate, you're going to get invited to all kinds of stuff like this. And you do have to guard your time, but it turns out, I thought it was a total waste of time. Well, it turns out there was a guy there who was in the local party, and he liked what I had to say, and he told this same Silicon Valley guy, hey, you need to meet Eglin. So this guy this bigwig, from two different people who were totally unconnected in his network heard, you need to meet Eglin. Well, this is a guy who every single presidential candidate, every single U.S. Senate candidate who can get on his schedule will fly on a dime to go meet with him. And this guy met with me. Well, he not only maxed out, wrote the max check right there. He called his wife and said, "Honey, I need you to come down right now because you can write a check to him too." And then he called some other investment banker buddies, and all these other $2,300 checks rolled in. And then the media found out that this guy gave to me, and they wrote a front page story in the biggest paper in Northern California that said, "Holy cow, Eglin is primary challenging somebody, and he's getting huge backing from a guy who's $1 million plus donor to the party since in the last 6 years." And that expands your viability. So now you're getting media coverage, you're getting money, you're getting media coverage. And now other donors start looking at you saying, well, I didn't like that you were doing a primary challenge. But remember, you don't have to be in a primary challenge. Whatever it is, donors are going to be looking at you and saying, well, not yet, or no. But each time you get a little success, that gives you an excuse to call them or let them look at you again and build that so that over time you're successful. So the other thing is just managing your time. People will waste your time. People love politics. I mean, we're all here because we're interested in this. There's a lot of people who are. got to guard your time. And just like in counterinsurgency, I want to talk about sources. So this sort of counter, intel type work, or you got to have sources on the ground and tell you what's going on. You don't want to fall in love with your sources, and you don't let your sources waste your time. You don't let them string you along. One of the challenges that you'll have, earlier Simone has said, hey, sometimes you don't always get to pick your campaign manager. Sometimes whoever sort of is willing to do it and has some qualification will end up as it. Well, that's true. But the flip side is some people will kind of try to get into your sphere that they have another agenda. What I experienced is I had some people who gave significant amounts of money and just said they back me and they're there to help me. But then what they tried to do, over time, I basically found out that they wanted to run a campaign. Even though we had never talked about that, I had asked them to sort of, be on the donor committee and raise money, and all they wanted to do was talk about how to spend money, like a strategist does. Because everybody fancies themselves as a top-notch political strategist. And so you've got to really guard against that. Find out people's agenda. Ask them, what do you want out of this? What can I do for you? What do you expect to do this? Do this after you've gotten them to, after you've cashed the check. Right? Make sure we got the sequencing down. Find out, hey, now what do you really expect from this? What is it that I can do for you that will really help you? Here's what I believe in, but what do you want me to emphasize? Or something, kind of get that clear. And then and make sure, because then it'll be easier to sort of, if they start deviating from that and saying, oh, well, I want to start you need a committee that's going to advise you. Your tendency is going to want to say yes because they donated and they held a fundraiser and you raised a lot of money from that, so they helped you. But remember, giving you money does not give anyone else the right to run your campaign. And I would really get that, in your head and be wary of the signs of that. Another thing is, so the coin phrase for this is don't fall in love with your sources. In the battlefield, it's sources of information. In the campaign, it's sources of either money or expertise or connections. But you've got to keep that arm's length relationship. Another example that I had is someone was a max out donor, raised me at least $7,000 or $8,000, which in that context was a lot of money, and then wanted to volunteer. Did my website, and paid for the website. They had some professional, they helped with that. On this one page on the website, they said it was just asking for volunteers. It was asking if you wanted to, have a little coffee at your house. Good grassroots way to get out, meet people, ask for some support, let people know who you are. So all it says is just this generic verbiage. I mean, he puts it up, I approve it, and I read it. It literally said, help Eric get the word out and have a coffee in your campaign. And have a coffee in the front room, it'll help the campaign. Totally boilerplate, generic verbiage. He had copied it off the website of the guy in the district who was in the other party actively campaigning. Verbatim, just copied it. So, that party, so I'm not running against them yet, but they want to start, once I was getting traction, they want to start weakening you. So they shot this. I mean, none of the sort of solid media would pick this story up because it's just generic verbiage. But it was verbatim. I mean, there was no question that, hey, that site was up first, this site says the exact same thing. And so they finally found somebody in, it's this remote place. It's basically an online newspaper run by two guys, but they do print out about 30 issues a week. And they published it, and now it's in LexisNexis of this massive plagiarism scandal. So someone who went to the Air Force Academy, this could mean expulsion for plagiarism. And boy, when I found out about it, you got to be ready to take quick action. What I did, as soon as I found out about it, I looked at the site and said, oh my God, I copied it. It's terrible. I mean, it was obvious. So I rewrote it myself, got it changed. And remember, the guy's on deadline, and if the media who you're dealing with doesn't like you or is supporting your opponent, they won't give you a day or a full day to change it. They'll say, oh, my deadline's in 30 minutes. Well, we managed to get that website changed, and I had to fire the volunteer. So I was able to say, it's already changed, we fired the volunteer, and we're going to have an apology phone call be made to the campaign, to the other campaign. So we did all that stuff, but now I have to fire the guy that I have to say, you really can't deal with the website anymore. and the guy just raising all the money. Guess who asked for a $4,600 refund? That's the reality of it. So had I kept that arm's length distance, that really wouldn't have been an issue because he wouldn't have been in a position to do some non-good thing. So I don't use too colorful language, thinking back about it. But he wouldn't have been in a position to do that damage to what I was doing. So just think about that. I mean, this is all about people. So when you're raising money, do that. Now, the other thing I mentioned this earlier one, but I got to repeat it. If you get invited to go speak somewhere, you really got to justify it, especially early on. Because remember, people aren't going to remember you. If you need to raise money, spend those 5 hours that you would have spent driving there, shaking hands, talking, spend it on the phone, and call 20 people. And if you raise $500 in that period in small amounts, you're better off because you're going to have that $500 when it comes time when voters, not you and the 2% of the people who follow this stuff like crazy, but when actual voters are making their decisions, and that's about 60 days into the race. So my example was, I spent all this time, I'm on TV, I got all this stuff, and I'm thinking, that's got to get traction. I told you earlier, I was at 0 in the polls. And that was basically name ID, too. Not just support, but name ID. I send out one piece of mail. So all that stuff I thought would give me 3 or 4%, 0. I send out one piece of mail to a small percentage of the likely primary voting universe. And all of a sudden, the poll got taken right after that. I'm at 7%. Sort of an amazing, that's a huge impact for one piece of mail. But that mail costs money. And for every $500 that I would have raised before, I would be able to put 2,000 pieces of mail. And you can run the math to say, well, that 2,000 pieces of mail at that rate would have translated to this many hundreds of votes. So, you've got to get into those metrics of your time. So, this is about fundraising, but ultimately it's about how you manage your time as well. So manage your time well, focus on fundraising, use those altering spheres, start close, and then work your way out as you build upon it so that you can build upon your success for that. So I'm at 14 minutes. I want to make sure I covered that. The other thing is that sort of big battle fallacy that in terms of fundraising, that, man, if I can just get this guy, or, I read about someone in the Washington Post, and he's this big money donor. Don't expect that, because don't think that one person is going to turn into this cascading waterfall of money flowing into your campaign. It's not going to happen, but you got to just keep plugging away. The flip side of that is be ready for opportunity. Look at this thing that's on the news right now. A guy, shouts out during the president's address, and his competitor, who had raised $67,000 as of last week, has just raised $1 million in 48 hours because people who are offended by that behavior want to send a message and say, hey, that's not okay. So this guy went from a no chance to a big win. A good chance of being a player. So you've got to be prepared for that opportunity as well. All right, so I'm at 15. Look forward to your questions.
By the way, Eric, I thought when you dropped out I could get my $50 back. I was one of those that got a call from Eric, and he's good, so and stay in the business. But I'm honored to be here and back at Princeton. Glad to see them supporting the military and veterans this way. Also glad to see our ROTC program growing exponentially from 3 when I was here to 5. The only Army ROTC unit truly with the motto, the few, the proud. So I've never run a campaign. I've never raised money for a political campaign. But with Vets for Freedom, my job for the last 2 years has been raising money for a cause, for an organization, essentially for a messaging campaign. Vets for Freedom is an organization of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, guys and gals who served on the ground, and our premise is that we believe they should have a voice in the public debate when they come home. That not only is there a front in the war overseas, but there's a battlefield of public opinion here, and we need to have informed voices be a part of that debate, lest it be hijacked by politicians and pundits who aren't interested in what's actually happening on the ground and the ramifications of our success and failure. That's why I'm here and why I believe it's so important that you're here, because that's inherent in what it means to serve and who you are as a veteran, you do indeed see higher principles than your own district or your own fiefdoms or your own political interest. There's something at stake for this country. I'm proud to be here, and I'm really proud that Seth and others have come together to create this forum. It's exactly what's been needed for quite a long time. It's also my work with Vets for Freedom. We've got over 112,000 members at this point, about 65% of which we know are veterans. We've done some improvement, database improvement, but some of our early captures didn't quite catch all the info we needed. But what that has done in bringing in our state captains and local leaders and bringing in veterans a number of times up to Capitol Hill, it's created a network of like-minded veterans who now can access each other, who know each other, who stay in touch beyond sort of the, and I'm a little biased here because I don't do Facebook and I don't do all those things, sort of the social networking, which is all very important, and I don't mean to, but when you create real physical face-to-face networks with people who share a common interest or a common perspective with you, I think that ends up being just as powerful, if not much more powerful. That's what this can be across the ideological spectrum. That's what an organization like Vets for Freedom is these guys draw upon each other in their contacts and their fundraising contacts. It's a new generation of guys who are empowered to do that. And that's what your units are. And this chapter 3 on funding your campaign talks about your units. You may not have a home base, but you've got a platoon, you've got a company, you've probably got multiple of guys that you know who they may not be able to give you a bunch of cash, but they're foot soldiers. Probably would come to your district and help you out. And probably know, a couple of them got a rich uncle who they can vouch to, who would throw a check into your campaign because you were their platoon leader or their fire team leader or whatever it was. So don't forget about that network when you're going along. And there's a reason, so to transition, there's a reason this chapter in your book is the longest. It's because it arguably is the most important. You could have the most compelling story in the world. You could be the most dynamic candidate on the ballot. But if you can't project your voice and you can't project your message, then you're at 0% in the polls. And you can go to as many county fairs as you want if you're in a big race, but ultimately you're not going to reach that voter who's not getting off the couch until election day or isn't paying attention until 2 weeks before. And then he flips on his TV and says, what are they spewing at me and who do I like? You have to have the resources at the end of the day to project your message. And that's what we realized as an organization. We raised $150,000 of hard money. That's not something that's been talked about a lot, but there's hard money, which is dollars that's regulated. You can only give a certain amount per candidate, per individual. So yeah, I could write a check, and somebody's wife could write a check. And then there's soft money, which we're a 501c4. So that organization, we raised $9 million last year of soft money, unlimited amounts from donors. It's entirely different. It's an entirely different fundraising approach, but that's another source of support for campaigns, said or unsaid, that can be brought to the table on issues. And there are groups that will weigh in on your race, PACs, 501c4s, different groups that will weigh in whether you like it or not with a lot of money and a powerful message. And I think it behooves you to know who those groups could be in your district. Get in front of them, make your case to them, and bring before them the statistics that show that you are a viable and relevant candidate. So I want to talk about a few things that I've seen, and some of it pertains to a PAC and hard dollars, which is the kind of money you would raise, and some of it pertains to sort of soft dollar amounts, but they're sort of inherent fundraising principles from what I've seen. First, you've got to find your center of gravity. Don't spend your time running around calling as many people as you can who can only raise you $50. Like, that's great, and you do want to do that, and you're eventually going to call those people and you're going to ask them for $50, because every amount matters. But sit back and think in your community, in your network of people that you know, maybe even 1 or 2 or 3 people removed. Who are those centers of gravity in your community who don't only write their own check, but then they turn to all their buddies and they say, write this guy a max check. And then they write it. And I sat in people's offices and they said, here's $1 million, and here's my buddy, and he's going to give you $1 million too. Because you go to the right people. And the right people can write those checks. But if you have to just take a little bit of time to identify who those people are. In a hard dollar setting, that's, I can write you $4,600, and so can my wife, and I'll write you one in the primary and in the general. And here's my network of 12 guys that can do the exact same thing. And then they know other people, and eventually it's sort of the power of exponents. They know each other, and these networks expand. They're out there. They're out there in your community. They're out there within your party. at the county level, at the state level. They're there. Get in front, identify who they are, have coffee with the people that know them, get in front of so you can eventually get in front of those other people and make your case, because that 15 minutes in their office with a coffee can reap a lot more benefits than sitting on the phone for 5 hours trying to reach out to people who, God bless the $50 check they're going to write, but it's not going to get you up on TV when it matters in October, November. So identify your centers of gravity, try to find them, get in front of them, and make your case. We've talked a lot about prioritizing your time. I won't talk a whole lot about that. That sort of has been belabored in a good way, because it is important. Be efficient. Don't spend all your time at county fairs when you can be burning up the phones. And a lot of times there are candidates who, even stories are written about the fact that they're not out there with the public, and because they're on the phone raising money while everyone else is out there glad handing. And then at the end of the day, they're up on TV with $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 worth of ads in the last 2 weeks, and they're able to make a huge push. But I would say, when you're getting in front of that center of gravity, or you're getting in front of groups in Washington, an important point is prove your viability to these top runners. You have to come in and think like a businessman. You're getting in front of people who have lived their entire career making money because they make efficient choices, they look at the bottom line, and they want to know whether you're a good investment or you're not a good investment. Not many people are in the charity business. Hey, you're a veteran, I like you, if they like you, you know what they'll do? They'll give you $1,000 and they'll say, go away. That happened to me all the time. Here's $5,000, go away. And the guy could have written us a $200,000 check. Here's $5,000, go away. Well, it'll be instead, here's $50, go away, good luck, kid. Come in there with, an understanding of your district, where your components, your opponent is vulnerable. What the metrics are, and that's where your political people like Las Avita come into play. They can give you the metrics that provide the wedge that speaks to these donors, speaks in the language of opportunities and statistics and fundraising, and sort of the poll numbers that you need to prove that you are viable. That's what they want to see. I went in so many times to offices of different donors, and they basically say, give me your five-minute pitch. And I talked to them about, why we need to win the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the legacy of our warriors. And they kind of look and go, yeah, I get it, I'm with you. I get it. But why can you be effective? How are you going to move your message? What is your plan? You need to come in and think like a businessman. Think like you've got, put together your budget, lay it out there so they know how you are going to spend their money. And it may only be $4,600, but you were an investment to them. And they want to know that it's a good investment. Something I don't think, there's some in here about events, types of fundraising approaches. And again, it's very good material, but my experience has been, and others may speak differently to this, is that events are very labor intensive, they're very time intensive, and ultimately you don't always raise a lot of money from them. So your staff pours time and energy into invitations and getting the word out and getting commitments, and then only half the people show up, and all of them write about half as much large of a check as they said they were going to write, and then you've spent $5,000 on an event that you brought in $8,000 on. And maybe you met some people, and that's great, but you aggregate all that time and all that expense on the front end, and if you were to spend that time meeting people one-on-one or raising money over the phone, you're making exponentially better use of your time otherwise. It's always fun, it's sexy to have an event with big headliners on it and bring them in. And sometimes you do that to show viability. Hey, the majority leaders or somebody else is going to come in my event. And that proves to people that you're a player and there's value in that. But if you're just doing event after event after event for the sake of doing events, it's not always the most effective way to raise money. At least hasn't been for me. As an organization, as a PAC, we have limited resources too. And as an organization, a veterans organization that is really, in our mind, is focused on an issue. And most organizations in Washington, whether it be the Club for Growth, whether it be the Chamber of Commerce, different groups that have PACs, have issues that they care about. And they want to find candidates that move that issue. For us, we want to find veterans who believe in sort of winning the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and a strong national defense. At the same time, we've got a reputation and a brand to guard. So we're not interested in everybody that comes in and says, I'm a veteran and I'm running as an independent or I'm running as a Republican in Manhattan, New York. It's like, well, that's great. and we wish you all the best, but we're not really going to give you any money. And we'll probably, we may endorse, but we may not. You have to look at these organizations. We have a brand to guard too. PACs or other groups have a brand to guard, and you can't run around endorsing everyone because they've got a particular background. You want to pick winners. You want to pick people who are going to get out there, spread their message, take it to the opponent, and win. And because the organizations in Washington don't want to spread their money thin, and they want to prove that they're effective political movers, that they're effective in moving their particular message. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to win these wars, and we want to do so through Republicans and Democrats who support our issues. But we're not here to just hand out endorsements for the sake of it. And it's frustrating for us, and it's frustrating for candidates, because sometimes the way you prove your viability is by getting these endorsements, and it's sort of a catch-22. It's this endless cycle. And there are times when groups like ours will say, we like your race, and you like it early, and we're going to help you early. In a case of that was Tom Rooney down in Florida, a freshman Republican congressman. Our PAC went and helped supported him in a primary. He ended up winning the primary and said himself, I believe that, they probably all say this, but I believe that to be a tipping point in that primary race was the fact that you guys have been active in the air and other things in our district, and then when you came in and supported me, that really helped push me over the edge. So be aware that these groups are very much looking at the viability piece, because they want to add, we want to add, be able to not just endorse you, but give the money necessary and do a press conference and do the types of things that support you in your race, provided we think it's going to work. Let's see, what else? So, I mean, the bottom line really is, and I don't want to go on and on without a train of thought, but the bottom line is that fundraising is your base level. It is what you need to focus your efforts on the minute you start your campaign, you start thinking about your campaign. Because if you cannot project your message, you're dead in the water. Whether you're an organization that's involved in trying to influence public opinion, like ours is, or you're a candidate, if you cannot project your message through direct mail, or through television, or through the radio, when people are paying attention in those final weeks, then you could have shaken all the hands you want. Sometimes, obviously, that's extremely effective. But if you can't project your message, then you're going to have problems. So that's all I've got to say on that.
A good comment so far. The emphasis on call time is absolutely critical, especially when you are just starting out. You're building a fundraising base. You have to have scores, hundreds of individual conversations with people who can write you checks. And a lot of first-time candidates, what they don't understand is that the person who makes the ask has to be a person that the person on the other end of the phone can't say no to. And sometimes that's the candidate, sometimes it's a friend of the candidate who maybe is a racer who has a network of their own. But that's something you've got to sit down and figure out. You literally have to go through your entire Rolodex. And I'll tell you the story of one of the congressional races I ran back in 2004. The candidate had a very big Rolodex, and that's very helpful. I sat down with him, with his wife, with all of his brothers and sisters, and with their spouses, and we went through and we marked down, we put a number by every single person on the Rolodex. We would think about what their profession is. Are they an attorney? Are they a mechanic? How much money would they be able to give? And then we prioritized all of those. We made an individual call sheet for each one of them that had the ask. Sometimes it's a specific ask just for a check. Sometimes it's an ask for a check and an ask to raise. And basically what that means is you send your finance director over to be with that person and debrief them on their Rolodex. So it's literally a painstaking brick by brick by brick process of basically building a wall. So I say all that to say it takes a lot of time. It's very labor intensive. And if if you're not willing to devote that time to the process, you're not going to be a successful candidate, in a larger sort of venue like a congressional race. A state house race, you can knock on every door, you can talk to every single person in the district. But like we've heard here, if you're going to project your message, a typical congressional race is going to cost you $1.5 million. And that takes, a year, sometimes more than a year, to put that kind of money together. And it's literally you with your finance director in a call room, sometimes 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, sometimes longer. I would go into the DCCC sometimes, and you would see candidates, who are on the, they'll call all day, they'll go in for votes, and then they'll come back, and they'll call the West Coast, from 8 o'clock until midnight. And they'll get people at home, and they'll get them at dinner, and some people have even started calling on weekends. So I don't want to paint a bleak picture about running for a public office that it's all about raising money, but you do spend the vast majority of your time, especially when you're kind of in a startup situation. If you're a challenger or you're in an open seat situation, you're not an incumbent, you spend a lot of time raising money, and you should. There are different types of money. There's the individual money that you raise in your district, from the people that you know, from your friends and your family, from groups who may have an interest in your campaign, from one of my favorite groups, the haters, the people who hate the other guy. They're always fun to talk to. And, that is a large part of assembling an argument for viability. You have to put the money together yourself on the ground. Because the next phase is to convince the National Party Committee, or whatever institutional evaluator you're in. I mean, for instance, there's some types of races that the National Party Committees don't care about because a Republican is going to win no matter what, or a Democrat is going to win no matter what. So maybe it's a group like Emily's List that might really care about this race. Because they know they're going to get a Democrat, but they want a pro-choice Democrat. Assembling that viability argument, the keystone of that is being able to go to be able to say, look, I put $500,000 together here. I did it in 6 months. I put $500,000 together. I outraised the rest of the field in my primary 2 to 1, 3 to 1. That gets people's attention. The next step from there, is when those kind of the big wheels in Washington kick into gear. And that's when, you go up there, you do the interviews with the regional political director at the party committee, you meet with the regional finance people, and they say, okay, so this guy or this woman might be for real. So let's put him in front of Charlie Cook and Stu Rothenberg. So, that's the next level. So what you do there is you have to prep for that like you would for a debate. You have to be ready, you have to walk in the door, you have to convince Stu or Charlie that you're not, a big joke, that you know what you're talking about, that you have a budget and a plan and a strategy. And if you don't, they will absolutely crucify you. And it will be humiliating and embarrassing, and you will end up, being laughed out of town. And these are very high-stakes things that you have to put together to build this viability argument. Because often, if you're a first-time candidate, you're not going to have good poll numbers. You're going to be at 4%, which, frankly, anybody can get 4% in a poll because that's the margin of error. So you have to walk in the door and be able to, say, look, here's $500,000. I put this together. I know what I'm doing. And once that happens, this is when the DC money comes into play. And maybe you've gotten out of your primary at this point. Maybe the party committees or the institutional evaluator have decided to play in the primary. Sometimes that happens. It's fairly rare. The next step, for instance, at the DCCC would be basically the bat signal goes out. And, everybody who are sort of the more typical givers, and at the NRCC, it's kind of the same way. They have a group of, PACs and lobbyists that they go to in town for money, just like we do. At that point, it's sort of like, okay, this person is kind of been blessed. They're serious, they're credible. You're good to write them a check. And then the next level is literally when, the chairman of the party committee, in my case, if it's Rom or Chris Van Hollen, or sometimes even the speaker herself, would get on the phone and literally call members and say, max out to this campaign. And the Melanson race in 04 is a great example. We put together a third of $1 million in a quarter, and it kind of, blew people away. We're not in the majority at that point. It was much harder to raise money than it is now. And so we kind of got people's attention. And then at the end of the race, after we got down to the primary, literally, envelopes full of checks from people we had never even heard of would just start showing up. And we would buy, $150,000 of TV. We would draw the bank account basically down to zero. That would keep us up for 3 days. And then 3 days later, we would have another $150,000 that had shown up in the mail. And buy all the TV we could buy. And then wait for the next package to show up from FedEx. And that's, once you're a targeted race, that's how that works. But takes a lot of work to get there. And the scut work on the front end is actually putting together that finance plan to get you, through your budget. And you should start with how much it's going to take to win, and you should work backwards from there. You shouldn't say, oh, well, I think I can raise $250,000. Well, that's great, if you're running for state senate, maybe. So definitely not in New Jersey. You spend a lot of money up here. So I think I've done my 15. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Going last, a lot of this stuff has already obviously been covered. Everybody here is right. It's funny because I actually just wrote down before we started speaking. If you can't do 25 hours of call time a week minimum, go home. There's no point. It's a terrible realization. It's not great. I mean, we all wish that it was purely based on merit of the candidate. It's not, and there's nothing you can do about that. So you just have to raise a lot of money. And if you aren't going to do that, don't put yourself through all the hard times that are going to come with the campaign. It's not worth it. I mean, if you're going to do 10 hours of call time a week, because it really isn't that much fun, and you're not going to make the full commitment, don't put your family through a campaign. Don't put yourself through a campaign. Just be serious about it. It's not fun, but it is worth it. So there's that. And call time is the lifeblood of your race as a challenger, because you're just not going to have the time to get around to individual meetings. And it's the most efficient use of your time. You were saying putting bricks in a wall. I always say it's like putting rocks in a catapult. It's like the more things you can put on that catapult, eventually it's going to reach a critical mass and you're going to be able to launch it all. It's the same way as you were saying with your paper route. It's a percentage game. The more people you call, the more people are going to say yes. Even if it's only 10%, it's going to add up over time. As far as Eric sent me a couple bullet points that I was going to try to hit, and most of them have already been hit. But what kind of donors should I be looking for? The most important thing that you can do, obviously, is build up your initial campaign chest. Because of all the different types of donors, the friends and family, the ideological allies, the haters, and the political investors, the players. All of these groups of people want to give to your race for a different reason. So figure out what it is before you ask them, because that's how you should tailor your conversation with them, your message with them. His story about going through the Rolodexes of family members is incredible. If you can do that, because I'm sure that was pretty successful.
Yeah.
And probably made a difference. job of going to the post office box and picking up the envelopes full of cash never would have happened if it wasn't for that first part. My boss, Congressman Murphy, when he started the race, he had $300 in his bank account. But he made a commitment that he was running for something other than himself. He was running for something that he believed in. And so when he was calling people to ask them for money, and it was a lot of money, he wasn't asking them for himself. It's not like he was going to go out and buy a car or something. He was doing it because he wanted to put himself through an incredibly arduous task of running for Congress. So he sucked it up, called friends and family, raised $100,000 in his first quarter. And that was the difference. It got us, as a 30-year-old candidate, legitimacy in a race with 5 other primary opponents. And all of a sudden, we were the serious candidates. We were the ones that people were, talking about. We still had to prove ourselves, but if it wasn't for that money, no shot. Pete was talking about the guys in your unit, or the guys you served with, or the guys you went to college with, the rich uncle example. And he was also talking about Tom Rooney. So it's kind of funny that my boss's best friend is Tom Rooney. Now they were sort of, obviously on different sides of the aisle, but they are best friends. And so when they served together in Iraq, they served together at West Point. So when it came time for Congressman Murphy to run for office, he called Tom. Tom contributed, even though they don't agree on political points. And Tom got his family, the owners of the Pittsburgh Steelers, to contribute to our campaign as well. And they still did to this day. Across the ideological bent of his family. Some are Democrats, some are Republicans, but really is the fulcrum, the turning point is the relationship issue. Now, probably shouldn't say this, but my boss, it's not easy for him to make these asks of his friends because he knows that this money means a lot to them. They're not getting it in return, but he does it because he knows that it's important. And if he didn't, he couldn't win. So keep that in mind as you go through your list. Even if there's a person you're like, I really don't feel comfortable, just do it. They're not going to be as offended as you think they are. So they're not going to be offended at all. Why do donors donate? We already talked about this more or less, but it's a lot of issues, ideological. They agree with you on something important and those things. Our opponent last time was a Marine colonel who disagreed with our position on Iraq, and he got a lot of donors based on that ideological difference. Good. That's free speech, part of the game. No, I'm serious. It's good. So find those people, find those activists, find if you agree with Vets for Freedom. He's not going to like me saying this, but find out who gives to them, and track them down, and make their pitch and say, hey, this is, I think we agree on something. I want to talk to you about my campaign. Now, the guys who give to Vets for Freedom are not going to give to you unless you're a viable candidate. So that's a little mix of a donor type. But the ideological people are important. The axe to grind, they're a little more difficult to find sometimes, but if you can track them down, they're extremely motivated to give the people who dislike their opponent. So find that they care a little bit less about liability, because as long as they can make your opponent's life a little difficult, they're okay. And then the final group, the political players, the PACs, the DC group, they're all about viability. It's all about it's an investment. And just like any company going to another group of investors looking for capital, that's what you guys are. So figure out what motivates your investors. Figure out what your selling point is. figure out why you're going to get a good rate of return. Now, obviously, it's not a quid pro quo thing, but how each dollar they're spending is going to be wisely invested. I think that's even a perfect way to tie in your ask for money. Now, I don't know if this has been covered before, but no one's ever going to give to you what you don't ask for. And no one's going to give you the amount of money that you want them to unless you ask them for that amount of money. So when you, and also when you're doing this ask, the point of the ask is to make it as uncomfortable as possible. As hard for them to say no as possible. When you're on the phone with someone and you reach that point in the conversation, and you make your ask and say, I really need you to contribute $1,000 to my campaign. That's it. Stop. Don't speak. Don't talk yourself back from the ask. Make them answer you. Because people are instinctively going to fill silence. And if they're filling silence and you just ask them for something and it's even remotely doable, they'll say yes just because they want it to be uncomfortable in this hand. That's a horribly blunt way of putting it, but it's incredibly important because you're never going to get people to do what you need them to do if you say, I need you to give me $500. If that's okay, I know it's a lot of money. Don't pay it. It's fine. Whatever you can do. It makes you feel better because you're filling the uncomfortable silence. So leave that to them. What are the best ways to raise money? Call time for you guys is any challenger. It's by far the best. 60% of your money. Give or take. You guys agree? 60% on call time. Maybe more. If some candidates don't feel comfortable doing that, so we try to tie events to call time, but at the end of the day, it's still all about the specific hard ask with regular follow-up, holding people to their pledges. If you're doing an event for the host and you want to raise $2,500, I wouldn't recommend doing an event for less than like $5 or $10 grand. But if you're doing an event and you want them to raise $2,500, you need to make that very specific that that's their responsibility. Follow up with them regularly, help them find their Rolodexes of people. It's very staff intensive, it's very labor intensive, but sometimes it's the only way to get it done. I understand that. But it still requires that fundamental suck it up, ask for a specific amount, and hold people accountable to that. One of the least effective ways to raise money initially is to have a website up. I've had conversations with, you should have a website, I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I've had conversations with candidates in the past who said, well, I have a website up, so I'm thinking that's going to generate some good conversations. Great, I got a billboard up,
I'm in the phone book.
Yeah. So you need to drive traffic to your website. If your website is a key part of your race, and it sounds like Eric, you had a strong web presence.
But it was leveraging the
Right, but he
online,
worked
the
really,
media.
he had worked really hard for a long time before that, and so that's why it was an effective use of his time, because he had already put in so much time. You don't have that time. So, while you should have comprehensive approaches to every facet of your fundraising, the uncomfortable tools of fundraising, your call time, your direct face-to-face asks, will always be more effective and should always be what you rely on. Now, for example, Mr. Miller down in South Carolina, he got really lucky. That's probably not going to happen for anybody here. So, while you should have a web presence,
I mean, I can't speak to it like true political operatives who understand the ground fight, but I mean, the fact that envelopes are showing up at the end is not going to come from the independent party. And ultimately, you can only draw so much from your network of friends and your Rolodex. And any network of high-dollar donors, they're not independents. They're at some level ideologues, whether they're leftists or conservatives, whatever they are. They've got a belief and they're going to back it. And it's, I mean, the one sort of viable independent candidacy, it was Joe Lieberman up in Connecticut. And he won based on money from sort of conservatives, largely in New York and elsewhere, who liked his stance on the war and wanted to be, the Democratic, the Ned Lamont. So, in short, I don't think it's much of a starter, and that could be a larger commentary on our political system. But as far as if you're stepping out and you're not independently wealthy, I think you can run as an independent if you're Ross Perot or you're Jesse Ventura or you're one of those guys from my home state. But otherwise, I just, in this environment, a young veteran running as an independent, like there's an independent spirit in veterans and in the way that they want to see the political process. But I think it's going to be pretty difficult to step out and win that way.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I mean, unless you're running in a venue, where you can be personally known by, the 51% of voters that it's going to need to, that you need to win. Otherwise, you are going to have to figure out how to project the message.
And also look at some of the most effective Democrats and effective Republicans in Congress. You've got, blue dog Democrats are making a lot of the decisions and they're deciding votes. Same with moderates in the Republican Party. So I think there's room in each side for you on some level, and I think you've got a lot more viability when you go that route.
But you don't necessarily have to be on TV.
Yeah, you're right.
You have to pay for the direct mail to talk to persuadable voters. You got to pay for your ground game and your phones. And you might go up on radio, or you might do some targeted cable buys. One or another, it will be an expensive campaign.
State House. The State House is a little more difficult. It depends to handicap. Depends on which State House district and also whether your particular party's Harrisburg group thinks that it's a worthwhile investment or not. Because if they think it's a worthwhile investment, they'll put the money in there. But if they don't,
Yeah.
150,000, 300,000, but it's a lot more than that.
And that brings up a good point, too, you just made. I mean, when it's not just the, envelopes full of checks that show up every 3 days once you're at a targeted race and once you've proven your viability. I mean, the national parties will also put together, very large independent expenditures in some cases on your behalf.
When the elected or not.
Exactly.
You have no control over what they say.
That's right. And you can't coordinate at all. And usually the national party will be there to just rip your opponent to shreds. That will be their job. That's the most effective use of their money. They can't really project your message as well as you can because you can't talk to each other. And it drives a lot of people completely crazy, but it's sort of reality of the world we live in. And state parties do the same thing.
I just want to make one small comment to piggyback on what Tim said about small dollar donations. Joe Wilson's opponent brought in $1 million. Joe Wilson is also bringing in a lot of money. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it's the way it works. We brought in the most money when MoveOn.org put up a big ad about General Petraeus. We go out to our membership and $50,000 into our PAC like this. Because find those targets of opportunity on the small dollar donors and leverage them. It doesn't mean you have to go out there and make outrageous claims about that stuff's not going to work. But find out when your issue or the issue you're good on becomes relevant and take advantage of it with the list of people that you know to go for those small dollar donations in those targets of opportunity.
If I can add that, you asked specifically about your race. I mean, basically the answer is it depends. But the way you can find out specifically is you want to talk to pros. So, I mean, you've got these guys here. You hit them up and say, hey, this is the district. Or get their card and follow up with them. Find out, well, in my area, who are the comparable pros. I mean, you run Murphy's fundraising, that's someone you want to talk to. That's impressive. So, I mean, you find out who the pros are that are on your side of the aisle, and then say, well, who are the movers and shakers in my area? And then you find out who they are, and then call them and say, I want to sit down and discuss this, and be specific. I'm thinking about running for X in this cycle, and I'd like to talk to you about it. Your first clue is when they don't call you back. I mean, they're business people. They've got to spend their time, invest their time wisely. When they do call you back, you meet with them and you find out how much do I need to raise. And then, you get a couple competing points of view, and then you have a good sense of what you're doing. So I mean, you can get that information, but remember, think about it. There's a lot of pros out there. They live and breathe by this stuff every cycle. Learn from them, and then that will help you make that wise decision of whether you're going to become a candidate or not.
There might be a news story at some point that you'll have a lot more mail and TV.
Because you'll erase, you'll take the money where it came from.
That's fine. And your local money will, if people don't know you in your local area, that's when you're talking about your viability givers. So they don't care where your money came from. So your money, your local money will come. We, as in our numbers, are not typical. We get money from all over the country, and people try to make hay with it every cycle. I mean, they care a little bit, but not really. It's way more important to be right on their issues. I mean, as long as they don't feel like, as long as it's not so drastic, I think, as long as it's not like 90-10 outside your district, as long as they don't feel like they have some PC guy being forced on them.
Well, you know what? You should never pick your platform based on where you think your money's going to come from, because honestly, there's money on every side of every issue at the end of the day. So, you should stand up for what you believe in. At the end of the day, the voters, they're going to respect that the most. You might make the trial lawyers angry, but you might make the business guys really happy. You might make organized labor happy with you, but you'll make the business guys angry, Or Google will hate you, but the telephone company will love you. I mean, there's always
As long as it's in terms of like how, I mean, tactics versus strategy, how
Twitter doing on the user quality low or not that kind of thing.
you should have a plan for how you should know when you need to do X, Y, or Z. But I mean, it depends on how bad it is, and how far out you should go. You would have to be serious trouble to heckle the president, or because it's going to raise you money, but it's going to piss people off. So as somebody who works for a veteran, there's always a calculated move that has to, and I know somebody spoke about this before, when you go after the service, and it always has to be when it's really bad. You never want to go after somebody's service until it's really bad. So think about it like that. You never want to really attack your opponent to raise money unless things are really bad. You don't want to change your message or your platform or your strategy at all to raise money until it's you or die.
And then I think your question also pertained to, you talked about envelopes coming in and money going out. I mean, you're going to set a plan of what you want to spend, generally when you want to spend it, and your message is going to adapt. I mean, again, differently inside a campaign, but it may move negative, and if it does, then that money's going to be spent on negative ads. If not, then you continue with sort of a plan of how you want to lay out your bulk and your message.
help you determine, where strategically, what your message is.
And that plan, that execution, you're looking at 0 to 60 basically. So I mean, your fundraising is the long tail. So you're raising resources way before you're spending a significant amount. And so that's really your off tempo. And one thing I did is just you kind of have your pitch for smaller donors. The other thing is kind of psychological. Like Pete said, hey, go for the big fish and do that. We also said call your buddy from your platoon and see how it goes. And it's like, yeah, do both, exactly. But the other thing is kind of know how you're doing. If you're down because you just got punched kicked in the teeth, punched on, and nobody's contributed, then call people who you know are going to give you some money. You know, it'll help you. I mean, you get confidence from that. I mean, you don't want to fail a million times, even if you know ultimately you'll succeed. Just sort of do that. Be flexible on it and say, hey, the important thing is you're putting in your 25 hours.
Right.
And so as long as you're building that muscle, then sort of be flexible. Hey, I need to call my, I need to call my aunt because I'm not hitting it on Wall Street this week. But then get that confidence back in, and also kind of have I had a packet for large donors. But if I thought someone could give $500 or more connecting with 5,000 or more, I had a really nice packet that I could send them, and sort of a whole battle rhythm to send it to them, follow up, then meet, kind of have that all lined out because you're looking at bigger fish. So you're going to invest more time, but at each time you don't want to have people wasting it. So you kind of have these thresholds where, okay, I've met with you twice, I need it, and if the answer, leave that uncomfortable silence. Then if the answer is no, move on. So that, in terms of battle rhythm and off tempo, that's how I would structure it. But remember, it's not really in and out. It's build and then out. And if you're lucky, you might get some in while you're executing. But it's more separate phases. In terms of raise it for a long time and then spend it for a short time.
Yeah, I mean, you could raise money for 2 years, and you spend 99% of your time on a campaign basically doing that in one way or another, and then you would spend all of it in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
It will feel like the wackiest thing that you've ever done. And a lot of first-time candidates get really, really nervous about that because they think, man, I'm not out there, and I'm not seeing the people, and my name's not out there, and I should buy some billboards and 1,000,000 yard signs, and stickers and chum and glow sticks. My name's not out there, but at the end of the day, you want to spend money when people are paying attention to your race, and most of them are not going to pay attention until everybody's up on TV. You got to buy the TV in big chunks, 1,000 points a pop if you really want to burn it in, and that costs a lot. And if you're in $1.5 million race, you have an $800,000 media budget. That's 8 weeks of TV, maybe 4, or maybe if you're in Philly, 3 or 2. And it all happens like that, and it's over faster than you even know it. But it's so painful and so hard to maintain that discipline and perseverance to continue to raise the money and not spend it. The other thing you'll have is a lot of people around you saying, oh yeah, I've got a church program that I need you to be in, or I've got, the table at the state party, dinner is $5,000, and you get to put 4 people at that table and really get your name out there. You're going to have 1 million people come at you like that, and then the local newspapers will come at you, and they'll want you to buy newspaper ads a year and a half out, and basically will hold over your, they won't say it, but they'll hold over your head, buy these ads now, we're going to make sure you look good. Seriously, you will hear everything. And all of these guys have done campaigns up here can vouch for that. And that is one of the hardest things in a campaign is to maintain fiscal discipline. Because people are going to want you to spend it early. And the other thing is, like you were saying, you'll have people on your kitchen cabinet who say, you know what, we need to get up on TV next week, or we need to buy 15 billboards. And I raised you $20,000, so you should spend my money on that. And you know what, maybe they got a brother-in-law who owns a billboard company. You never know. So that really is one of the most, aside from staying on the phone, is not spending the money until you really need to spend the money, which is really about 6 weeks out, most of these races.
Yeah.
Ron Ryan from Alabama, Virginia. Is there a direct, following up on the question over here, is there a direct correlation between local money and votes? And is there a direct correlation
worth of money, we could change the turnout. So you don't need to raise more money, but you do need to raise as much as you can possibly can.
Okay, you need to raise enough to fulfill your campaign plan. And a good campaign plan will get your message out. So maybe the other guy has the ability to write a personal check and he can outspend you 3 or 4 to 1. But if you still have the ability to achieve that saturation level, those 8 or 9 or 10 hits that you need to get in order to become have universal name recognition and be electorally viable, then you can still win. And that 95% something number, I mean, that's an aggregation of probably every single political campaign in the country, right? Most of them are not even competitive. You have incumbents who raise, $1 billion and they don't really have anybody running against them. It's the competitive races that tend to be the outliers, and they tend to be the ones that we all pay attention to because they're the interesting ones. They're the ones that the press writes about, and those are the times when someone with less money can win. But when you get into ridiculous ratios of money being spent against you, it does become much harder to win. Just because, and I've been in this situation before. If someone is outspending you 4 or 5 to 1, that means that there are 4 of their television spots for every one of yours at a very basic level. So the person who's watching the news at night is much more likely to know about them than they are to know about you.
I think everything those guys said is correct. I also would say that it's on a sliding scale from sort of federal races to local races. So if you're sitting here saying, I want to run for city council, I don't think it's as important that you raise exponentially more than your opponent. It's more important that you have name ID in the community, and you're shaking a lot of hands, and you're going door to door. So we happen to be talking kind of on the national perspective, congressional races. A lot of it comes down to dollars and cents from the national party. But as you get more and more local, it comes down to where is your credibility, how many people have you met, do they know you, do they trust you? And again, at the state senate level, it gets more ambiguous, and it starts to be airtime and money. And so it's going to be different for every race. Don't be necessarily discouraged about that fact. It doesn't apply everywhere and at all times.
And I did a state house race where we raised $15,000. There are 20-something thousand voters in the district. My candidate knocked on every single door. The incumbent was the floor leader for the Chamber of Commerce in the state legislature, and was unbelievably well funded. And we beat the guy with 58% of the vote. Clearly, that was a function of him getting out there and hitting those doors and talking really probably to every single voter in the district more than once. Who's going to vote.
Okay, so what I just heard from both of you, the bottom line here is effectively communicating your message.
That's right. And it's all about the scale of what you're trying to communicate.
We had a local race in my neighborhood where the one side spent $50,000, and the other side might have spent $500, and the side that spent $50,000 lost. I mean, it was out of 5, and they lost 2 of the spots, which is almost $50,000. So it's possible. And they're only, so electric like 50,000 people. Possible.
I think I have time for one more question. So,
How you doing? You come out. Rick Carter, I'm originally from LA, I live in DC now. My question is regarding low-income neighborhoods, districts. Is there any specific strategies for raising money in those districts, or raising money elsewhere to help you run in those districts? I mean, I come from a part of the country where $100 might be a family's entire disposable income for the month.
Yeah, I mean,
That's our word silence.
That may not, good point, that may not be where you raise your money, or maybe where you get your votes, but you need to go elsewhere. And plus too, in those communities generally press the flesh, hit those local folk and the local communities, and they can help.
and you can do small dollar events too. I mean,
Louisiana is not the most, not exactly what it's about, that. Or you roll it.
You can get volunteers too.
yeah, that's right. Volunteers, and you can do small dollar events. I mean, every single dollar is important. And if you're asking a group of people to put together, $10, $20 to come, to a bean supper or something like that, that's worth your time too. Because are in, can go to a good school, or that we can eat, that I have a job. It's very basic, hierarchy of needs kind of stuff. So it's really, really important that, you do go out there and talk to those folks, especially if they're your voters, and that you let them know when election day is. That's one of the most important things you can do in some of your base areas, is to be out there, knock on their door, 3 times on the way into GOTV, hang a door hanger on it. And in the process, maybe if you can put a small dollar event together, a few weeks out, call it a GOTV rally, remind everybody that it's going to be time to vote, you walk away with $500, it's a win-win for everybody.
There's a congressman in Northern California who raises $50,000 at a pasta supper that's like $75 every year. He does it 1 year, and it's a big thing. It's not a ton of money, but each, but like it adds up. There are thousands of people.
And think about leveraging it. I mean, what I'm thinking of when I hear you say that, I'm thinking of, I want to set up an event where I go into a neighborhood like this, and I pre-set it, I get people to give me $5 per household. And you walk around and literally get $5 checks and thank people, but somebody's videotaping it. Then you're creating a video and with some sort of statement to say, hey, I not only care about these issues, everybody in this race says they care about these folks. I'm here meeting them, listening to them, and they support me. Put a nice video together, now you've got the potential to leverage that and push it out nationally to groups that resonate with that, groups that say they support folks like that. Other people, you're going to impress people who are in totally different socioeconomic spectrum, part of the spectrum, but maybe they care about those folks too. And so you keep thinking, you can do it, do whatever you can, but then leverage it for something else and something bigger, because that gives you sort of street cred. Why was there dead silence when you asked your question? Because that doesn't really, it's not that common, So do it, record it, and then leverage it to larger audiences.
If you do an event like that, make sure you get everybody who's there to sign a supporter card, make sure they're registered to vote, and turn them out. Get them in your voter file, in your database, and make sure that you talk to them before election day, because they are some of the most important voters for you. They'll be some of your most reliable voters, but they're also people who have a lot of things on their mind besides politics. You got to remind them that it's election day.
I just say one thing about the call time thing. I didn't mean to scare everybody, but you guys are better. You know it's like to sign up for something you know it's going to be hard. It's going to be worth it in the long term. That's what this is. So yeah, it's going to suck for a while, and there are certain things that are not going to be fun about it. But you're doing it because you care about it, and because it's worth it. So it's a labor of love.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Before you leave, hang your head thinking cynically about the process and the amount of money that you have to raise. Remember why you're in it. Ultimately, stand up for what you believe in, maintain that independent spirit. And I think the final speaker of the day here, Congressman Jim Marshall, is a great personification of that. A Democrat who runs in a conservative district, didn't necessarily endorse Obama, ran against the Republican general in this last election, and won, and has voted against his own party numerous times, and much to his possible electoral peril in particular. And that's why his organization, we supported him, and others across different lines did. So just because you got to raise a lot of money doesn't mean you have to alter what you believe.
Let's thank our panelists one more time.